Welcome to Decide to Transform. You made it to level 2, deeper questions leading to deeper answers. I'm Tomas Garza, and I'm here to help you decide to transform. I'll be setting the pace for the process to support your unfolding. Learn and commit to a practice that brings simplicity and awareness of what is ready to be released. Join me now and allow the experience of a deeper sense of love. Welcome everyone to Decide to Transform. I am your host, Tomas Garza, and you're listening to Om Times Radio. Now, wherever you are tuning in from, I hope that you're having a great day or a great evening, and that you and your family and your loved ones are staying safe and sound and sane as possible, as much as you can during all of these highly bizarre times. All right. So I want to leap right into the topic of today's show, which is standing up to difficult people. That's the title, and it's something that we all have experience with, and this is something that we all continue to have experience with in our lives. And this continues a string of very personal radio shows where I'm going to go deeper than I have in the past few months and share some of the things that I have done that have not worked very well in terms of personal growth, in terms of transformation, and today in terms of dealing with very, very difficult people in my life. Last week on the show, I talked about how I, as a young adult, especially routinely ignored my calling and routinely ignored very strong voices and signs from the universe that I needed to be doing something else with my life. And as you'll recall, that led me down a lot of paths that were meant to be, but there was a lot of suffering that went along with that. A lot of headache, some depression, and it's just a very raw and numbing feeling to feel as though you're constantly miscast in life, and even worse, you did it to yourself. Because almost all of the time, we do it to ourselves. All of our suffering, if we really think about it, we bring upon ourselves in the way that we habitually respond to the world around us. So I really am looking forward to today's show. And wherever you're tuning in from, I hope that you are going to get something of real value to you today. And this is something where I would love to hear from you, the listeners, and I invite your questions and comments. And you are more than welcome to email me at Tomas, Tomas, at tomasgarza.com. And I'll repeat that again later in the broadcast, but your questions are always welcome. And in the past, I've read some of these questions from you, the listeners, on the air. And they have helped people literally all over the world with pressing concerns and issues that they wanted answers to. And you never know who you're going to reach. That's one of the reasons that I started podcasting in the first place, was to broaden the reach of teachings that I know will benefit you. So I'm going to get personal today, and I'm going to talk about standing up to difficult people. And it is very much, as the subtitle of today's show indicates, a personal exposé. Okay. These personal exposés are the result of some direct requests from not only you, the listeners, but also my wife, Cindy. And thank you very much, Cindy. I know you're listening in the other room over here. That she actually pointed out to me that it would be really powerful and really beneficial if I were to talk about some of these transformative experiences, and rather than talk about them in general terms, to get very, very down in the nitty-gritty and details and personal. And what I will not do is I will not go off on an F-bomb laced tirade today, even though I've done that in the past. Who hasn't? But when we deal with difficult people, what happens is all of our emotions get triggered. They're triggers to us. They can serve as triggers. And this can be literally anyone in your life. We could be talking about somebody that you're in a close, intimate relationship with. This could be your spouse for some of you. This could be a boyfriend, girlfriend, or a romantic partner. It could also be someone that you work with. It could be a colleague. You never know who will show up in your life and present you with difficulties. And I don't mean that it is just someone who annoys you every now and then. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about a persistent pattern of annoyance, not somebody who shows up at the office and cracks a joke that you think is off color, or somebody that sneezes too loud or in a meeting or something like that. I'm not talking about those garden variety little things that we notice from people all the time. I'm talking about people who habitually engage in a pattern of behavior that has the effect of dragging you down. That's what we're talking about today. That is what I mean for the purposes of this show by difficult. And in fact, today's show is going to involve a number of stories of things that I did wrong that I'll share with you completely honestly. And I will share with you about the person that is the subject matter of most of this, and that is my very own mother. What I didn't mention a minute ago was that sometimes the person that is a very difficult presence in your life is a family member. And sometimes it's a parent. For some of you, this might be one of your children. If you have teenage or adult children, especially, that's possible. For me, it was my own mother, and I can talk about this because I've learned from the situation. I've grown tremendously and changed tremendously over the years based on some actions that I took about 6 years ago. Now, my mother is not listening to this broadcast. She passed away in May of 2016. So I offer all of this to you as an example of what you might choose to do to deal with somebody that is very difficult in your own lives. And if you know of somebody that would benefit from hearing today's show, then please share this with them. The show will be archived on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, etc. Wherever you listen to podcasts, this show will be up and available probably within 24 hours here. So please share this information with people, and I hope that you get a lot out of it as well. So by difficult, I mean when I'm referencing my own mom, and particularly somebody that constantly disapproves of you. Do you have a parent like that? I'll bet some of you do. I bet many people do. It's quite common that a parent will want different things of us than we want of ourselves, and many of them don't hesitate to tell you that, and tell you that again and again and again and again and again. Critical people that project their own insecurities. And I'll explain in a moment a little bit more what I mean by that, just so we're all clear. Projecting your insecurities all the time onto people is a sign of somebody that is really struggling in life, ultimately. And she was, my mom was. Fighting with people, dragging people down. This is what I mean by difficult, and for the purposes of the show, persistently difficult. So let's talk about the component of psychological projection. This is something that we all do as human beings. I do it. I've done it in the past. Not a single one of us is immune to this. It is very much a part of the human condition and the way that we're made up. However, it also doesn't have to happen all of the time. This is not something that we have to continue to do in our lives. Now, by psychological projection, I mean putting our own sense of fear or our own sense of guilt anger, frustration, rage off on someone else. So think about your own life and perhaps a recent experience that you might have had where you felt angry or like you were hurt or frustrated, fearful. Think of how that felt for a moment. And yes, I'm asking you to recall that feeling. It might be very easy for you to do, especially if this took place recently. So that feeling doesn't feel good to us, does it? Nobody wants to run around feeling fearful or guilty or enraged all of the time. So what do we do as human beings? We all try to project that onto someone else. I spent 13 years in the field of conflict resolution earlier in my life as a divorce mediator. As a child custody and family mediator, I saw this happen all the time with people that were in relationship to one another. Spouses do this to each other. What we do is it's habitual. We don't want to feel guilty or horrible or bad or angry, fearful, frustrated, so we put that off on someone else. This is how people start to blame one another for something that they themselves are going through. This is what's known as projection, and we all do it. So somebody that I would classify as a difficult person projects their insecurities and their fear and their frustration all of the time. And I will share, because I can, and I've promised that I would, that my mother projected her own fears and her own insecurity onto me all of the time. And this took the form of frustration a lot for her, frustration that she was living her life the way she chose to live it. She was a very, very severe alcoholic. And that's something that not a lot of people chose to acknowledge, but I acknowledge it. You can't help if you live with one. You know full well. If you've lived with one in the past, you know even better. Right? You can't help but acknowledge when someone has an issue with alcoholism or addiction of some form. Could be drug addiction, sex addiction, gambling, you name it. Right? It's right there, front and center, and a number of people choose not to deal with it. And in my mom's life, a lot of people just swept it under the rug. It's very easy to do as a defense mechanism to say, okay, this is just the way this person is. I am going to just walk away. And it may work once or twice, but not always. If we're talking about a long-term relationship, walking away is not a good strategy. So she projected her fears on to me and her own frustration at living her life the way she did. She wished that she had made more of her life than she did. And she told me that several times, but most of the time it was not in the form of a rational discussion. Most of the time it was an off-the-cuff F-bomb laced tirade with high drama. This was a dramatic person. If you have a dramatic family member, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. High drama, things that were said to me often out of the blue, repeatedly, that I choose not to air here on the radio. But you can use your imagination. You can completely use your imagination. Because when somebody is projecting, they feel, when we're doing it, think about when you do it, we often feel justified. That's the feeling. We feel justified in lashing out and blaming somebody else. And ultimately, if we think about it, we're really blaming them for our own actions, our own beliefs, possibly, our own misfortune with which we're not satisfied. And again, this can be anybody in any capacity that you're working with in life. You could be working with a boss or a work associate. It could be in that context. It could be in the family context or somebody that you're in a relationship with. So again, the individual is what they are. They are what they are. This is what it is in your situation. The question that I really want to address and share in more detail here on the show is when you are stuck, and as a child, you really don't get to choose your parents. They say kids are very resilient. Well, they have to be. Sad but true, right? They have to, many of them, develop that skill, and it can come in handy for them in later life, yes, without a question. But in my instance, and I have a younger sister as well, and I will not be speaking for her at all on this radio show, nor for her experience, just acknowledging that everyone else processes this type of situation differently. So I'm going to be sharing strategy-wise, what did not work for me and how I continued to create frustration, pain, and suffering for myself. And I will also share with you, finally, years after I had endured this for years, a lot of abuse, lots of abuse, a really, really difficult amount of abuse, how I was able to get away from that and preserve the most important thing, which is my own sanity. Sometimes people value preserving a relationship. Sometimes a relationship is not worth preserving. And that's true in any arena of life. This is one of the most difficult decisions that we can make as somebody who wishes to find an adult behavioral solution to a persistent issue. The question becomes, do we continue the relationship or do we let it go? And if we choose to let it go, how are we going to do that? And what will all of our boundaries be? So we'll talk about that on the other side of the commercial break here. You're listening to Decide to Transform on Om Times Radio. We'll be right back.
Connecting you with the best of the conscious minds in the world. Om Times Radio. IOM FM. Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. Om Times Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single Om Times endeavor. Host your show with Om Times Radio Network.
Did you know that you have the power to change anything in your life? Did you know you can do so even with the things that you've already decided are impossible to change? Come join me, Venus Castleberg, on Outside the Impossible as I interview people from around the globe that have literally changed the things they thought were impossible to change just by using the amazing tools of Access Consciousness. Now airing Wednesdays 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. Do you dare to believe that anything really is possible?
Are you considering starting your own podcast? Do you have a book or other content you'd like to share with a worldwide audience? Hello, I'm Tomas Garza, host of Decide to Transform here on Om Times Radio. Myself and Lisa Berry, host of Light on Living, help people like you produce your very own radio show. At Podcast Prosperity, we help you create your show and recirculate your content for multimedia impact. Through creation and launch, we give you the support and mentorship you need and help you create the influence, income, and impact you desire. Contact us at lightonliving.com/podcast prosperity.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Decide to Transform. I'm your host, Tomas Garza, and we are in the midst of what I'm calling a personal expose today, standing up to difficult people. And if you just tuned in, I'm talking today about my own mother who passed away 4 years ago as an example of what I did wrong in terms of dealing with somebody that was a continually abusive person. So first of all, I want to say a couple of things that I said routinely when I was a professor of conflict resolution, several years ago at Portland State University, and that is, if you find yourself in a genuinely abusive situation, please seek help. Okay, because help is available. All right, help is available, and if you're in this situation and you're listening today, seek help. It's available to you. All right, if you know of somebody that this will benefit, then I really want to invite you to listen in yourself and to encourage them to listen in as well. Was what I did with my own mother, whom I shared before the break, was a hardcore alcoholic. In fact, a lifelong alcoholic. Means if you've ever dealt with an alcoholic in your life, you'll know that the patterns of behavior can really vary. And not everybody is a happy drunk that sits in a chair and makes jokes at a party and laughs and smiles and is obviously having a good time. Yeah, that's not the case for everybody, and it was not the case for my mom, who was quite mean and went after me personally, physically, as well as verbally. And honestly, I am a large guy, and I was even larger when I was in high school. I played defensive tackle in football in high school and weighed close to 215 to 220 pounds my senior year, 6'3", muscles, everything. A large guy. I'm much smaller than that at age 48 and in better shape, I'm happy to add. But at the time, the physical assault was easily brushed off. What's not so easily brushed off for me is the verbal tirades that I had to endure. And at the worst of times, especially in the mid-1980s, this meant almost on a nightly basis. What you will know from dealing with somebody that's really difficult, and alcoholics could be, unpredictability is something that comes at us. This is my life. That was the way. It's not my life now, but it was then. This is the way that I was raised, with high volatility, high unpredictability of behavior. Now, one moment, my mom could be the nicest human being in the world. She was a registered nurse and got rave reviews from patients, from her coworkers, from the hospital systems that she worked in. Rave reviews because she had a very kind, a very compassionate side to her. And when she began to hit the bottle, it all went to hell, as you say. It fell apart on her, and therefore, as her child, it fell apart on me until I left after the completion of high school and didn't live with her again ever in my life, which is always a good thing. We see so many people going back to bad relationships for fear of economic insecurity, for fear of we don't know what, because it's different, very different for everybody. So this was the situation where I didn't know whether I was going to get the kind and compassionate human being or whether I was going to get the mean alcoholic. And that is not the most productive way to live one's life. So if you are in this situation as an adult, know that there are better ways that you can live life. And I saw this play out again. I'll remind you that I have a lot of experience in conflict resolution, and including walking people through difficult situations that I'll walk you through today. I'll walk through some of the solutions that I chose to put into place in dealing with my own mother. So this problem persisted after I graduated high school. This is not something that was just limited to the 1980s. This is something that continued on, especially the disapproval and the tirades. Continued on. And sometimes it would be in the of a phone call. A lot of place pre-internet, and even after the internet came out and everybody began to use it in the 90s and the 2000s, this took place still on the telephone, and every time that we would see each other in person, almost every time. And it was a deliberate attempt to make me feel guilty for my choices in life. A deliberate attempt to make me feel guilty for leaving Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I grew up, and going off to Oregon to attend graduate school and then live my life. Guilt, right? Solid guilt and disapproval. And when that didn't work, then direct personal attacks. And I went on to have 2 children who were born in the 2000s. I now have a 17-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter, and I'm very, very grateful for them. This actually, for me, amped up the pressure with my own mother. And she, living about 1,400 miles away in a different time zone, in a different state, did her best, I'll give her credit for that, to try to see my kids as often as she could. And we also brought the kids sometimes to New Mexico to see her. So they do have a bit of a relationship with her. They did, I should say. And that was something that meant a lot to me. But what was wonderful for them and fun and getting to play with their grandmother, going to the pool, for example, or the park for the day, to a restaurant to go get pizza, something along those lines, it's more difficult for the parent, isn't it? If you have a difficult parent and you have kids, they want to have a relationship with their grandkids. Yes, it's perfectly understandable. What can be hard is how the two of you, the adults, relate while the kids are off playing on the slide. And for me, that was very difficult because the tirades would begin, and she didn't have to be drunk. In my case, we're talking sober and berating and demeaning me in front of the kids. And here's the way I handle these situations. Everybody handles an immediate conflict situation differently. There are people, I know you know them, you might be one of these people, that vents and dumps and is done. Now, this might benefit you in certain ways, that you don't hold on to anything, that you don't replay an event and replay what you could have or might possibly have said differently. So that could be a benefit. Every conflict style has definite pros and cons built into them. And why are there cons built into them? Well, because it's conflict in the first place, which, as we see on a spiritual path, is something that we need to release and we need to work through. Because while it defines our human experience, ultimately it is not necessary. So part of our learning curve here in this lifetime is to learn how to effectively manage our own emotions so we don't get caught up in our habitual tendencies. So what did not work for me when it came to dealing with my own mother? Well, my habitual tendency as a young man was to get angry. And that's simply the way it was. An F-bomb laced tirade would be likely met with another F-bomb laced tirade. And passive aggressive behavior would have been met not skillfully when I was younger, but with rage, with shunning, with shutting down, with an F-bomb laced tirade, because that was my MO. And I didn't have a very good example of that growing up. Many of us don't. And then we find as adults, especially if we're on a spiritual path or a transformational path, that we then have to unlearn all of the things that are habitual for us. So my mother fell into the category of people that would vent and be done with it. And the venting could be horrible. Now, we just talked a minute ago about how this might be a pro to a way of handling conflict, and that you don't hold grudges and you don't dwell on specific situations. However, not everybody's that way. Some people vent and discharge their verbal vomit on you, upon you, and you might be one of these people that takes a while to work through that and to digest it. And you might be one of these people that's not going to forget it within 15 minutes. And you're going to remember it the next morning. And perhaps you wake up and you're still upset about something that happened that morning or the following day, the day prior, and the other person might say, well, get over it. What are you still so upset about? And what if they went off on you, caught you completely off guard, off the cuff, and personal attacks about what a loser you are, about how they hate certain aspects of your personality, how you have done something to anger them and annoy them, and that you always do something angry and annoying, and one attack after another, and they could be done with it in 5 minutes. And what if you're not? Right? What if you're still processing that and thinking about, how do I really want to respond to this the next day? What if you're still upset the next day? Perfectly normal. That's me. That, especially when I was younger, because people don't have the right to verbally vomit on somebody and expect that the other person is going to be fine with it immediately after. We don't have that right. And you, as an adult, as a human being, have a right not to be treated that way. And I'll talk more about this, because this is eventually how I chose to deal with my mother. But before I do that, I want to share a little bit more about some of the ways that her behavior got worse over time after I had children. And we talked a few minutes ago about how she would corner me while the kids were swimming in the pool or playing on the slide at the park or something, and use the opportunity that she had with me sitting right next to her in her personal space to inject an F-bomb laced tirade, to voice her express disapproval on the fact that I lived in a different state, to voice her express disapproval that I had chosen a career path that I talked about on the show last week, to voice her disapproval at my choice of spouse at the time. We're divorced now, but my mom was very disapproving. And also to voice her disapproval at my children's lack of manners, which really was something, because who doesn't eat pizza with their hands? Okay? Actually, I do know people that eat it with a fork and knife, but, it's finger food. So too is barbecued chicken. So too are French fries and chicken nuggets. And my mom would note any little thing that didn't match her upbringing, which had to do very much with strict manners. Yes, there are some definite pros in that, most definitely. But, to insist that a 5 to 6 year old child eat pizza with a fork and knife, and to disapprove of them as a human being because they don't is a little harsh. And how would you feel as the parent if, your mom habitually went off on you like that? So what I did was I wanted to preserve the relationship. This is something that's quite natural. We often want to preserve a relationship, and a lot of the questions that I used to get in conflict management and in conflict resolution courses had to do with, okay, how do I preserve the relationship? Well, there are a lot of ways, but in the context of this question, I would often ask people, do you want to? Do you want to preserve the relationship? And what are the costs to you if you choose to do so? And weigh that against what the costs are and the benefits of ending the relationship. This could be your romantic partnership right now. What's it going to cost you to stay in the relationship? That's a question. It's a legitimate question. I would often ask people that. And I would ask myself as well, because the entire time that this was going on, I had a personal meditation practice, which I've had since the mid-1980s, but I hadn't done enough personal learning to get away from negative situations. I wanted to preserve the relationship, and it was costing me my own sanity. It costs us sometimes our own sanity to continue to harbor a relationship with toxic people, habitually toxic people. Now, this is what I chose to do, mostly because the kids were involved and I wanted them to have a relationship, but it always ended up costing me. It always ended up costing me my peace of mind, and that is the most valuable thing that we all have, is our peace of mind. So after the commercial break, I will share with you some techniques that I put to use that helped transform the situation for me and really change the course of my adult life around. And these are things that you might be able to do too. So stick around. We'll be right back.
Free your mind with Om Times Radio, IOM FM.
Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Connect at omtimes.com. Om Times, creating a more conscious lifestyle.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on Om Times Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
Hi, I'm Tomas Garza, author of Decide and host of Decide to Transform on Om Times Radio. I want to ask you, if you want something in life, have you decided on it? If not, you'll listen to a limiting story about yourself. You will say you can't, you're too old, too young, etc. Decide to transform in life. Learn what you can choose to believe instead of your limiting stories. Decide. Available now in paperback and ebook.
I'm Fidel Mshombo. I was born in a city called the Bukavu in the Congo. We were a loving family, and then, boom, Everything that I had disappeared in a single day.
People think that when you are a refugee and they resettle you to America and all your problems are done, they don't understand that that's the beginning of everything.
I was not born a refugee. I was made one.
It's time we welcome refugee families with open arms. Learn more at embracerefugees.org, brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Decide to Transform. I'm your host, Tomas Garza, and you are listening to a personal expose about how I handled a difficult person in the form of my own mother very poorly for many years. And during this final segment of the show, I'll be sharing with you some techniques, frankly, that I put to work, some suggestions from other people that I put to use in my own life that transformed a negative situation. Now, I don't mean, by the way, in case you're wondering, I don't mean saving a toxic relationship. This is a choice that we all have to make, and it might be a choice that's facing you right now in your life. Right? Perhaps you're deciding whether to leave a field of employment with a toxic supervisor. Perhaps you are making a decision or trying to make a decision about whether to leave an unhelpful, an unhealthy, or an abusive relationship. And again, as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, please know that there is help available to you. And I want to invite you, if this applies to you, to please seek that. Okay? Now let me say that again. You could be in a situation where you have a very toxic family member and you can't get away from them in the sense that you don't get to choose your own parents. However, what we all do get to choose is how we respond to what life throws at us. That we do get to choose. We don't have to choose that. We get to choose that. And I really want to emphasize that piece of positivity. If you take nothing out of this broadcast other than this, say instead of I have to do something or I need to do something, I get to. You'll be coming from a place of more creativity, much more authenticity, and it's much more like who you really are. That's much more like your true self. If you follow A Course in Miracles, this is much more akin to the way the Holy Spirit operates. It's a lot closer to the way highly evolved spiritual people operate. This is your higher self that we're talking about here. Whatever form you choose to practice your spirituality, however that looks for you, we all have a right to stand up for ourselves. And it's imperative that we do it. Why? Because we're teaching all of the time. Now, when this sunk in for me, it was about 2013 and 2014, around that time a few years ago, where as an adult in my early 40s, I had a series of aha moments. You could call it that. You could honestly call it that, a series of personal revelations that came to me through a lot of pain in dealing with my own mother, who continued to lambast me. She lambasted my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, Cindy, and we all made a fatal mistake in 2013 when my mom proposed to take Cindy and me and my two children on an Alaskan cruise. So you can imagine, if you've been to southeastern Alaska, you will know that it's very picturesque. It's very beautiful. There are orcas and other kinds of whales, seals, sea lions, bears, salmon, gorgeous mountains. It's a beautiful place. However, when you are on a ship that you cannot get off of, right, if you are stuck physically with somebody that you've had enough of, then it's really stressful. And that, for me, was a real stressor. And that was the kicker for me, putting my foot down and saying, okay, here's the way it's going to be. And I had to have a lot of personal growth until I did that. We're talking years of abuse. Now, we didn't live together in the same town or the same area, so this became less frequent as I grew older and had kids, lived my own life, but it became more intense as well. And the need to do something constructive about it grew more urgent all of the time. So what did I do? Well, I remember reading back in the 2000s a book by the poet Robert Bly called Iron John. Again, the title is Iron John. And one of the things that I remember from that book that had a tremendous amount of impact on me was a way that he suggested we deal with difficult people, just like my mother. And this is a constructive thing that you can do. And it's simply to say, and I don't remember the exact verbiage, but it was very impactful for me. And this is something that we can all do. You can say, okay, I do not permit people to speak to me that way. I know you're looking to me to lash out or to yell at you or to freak out in some way, shape, or form, because I've done that in the past, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be treated like this. Here's what I expect in the process. And then you can outline your boundaries, set your boundaries. Very, very critically important in any relationship that there's an idea of what the boundaries are. If they're breached, it's very critically important that you and the other person or people have a discussion about what happened, how it impacted everybody, and what needs to happen going forward, constructively, proactively. It's very important not to allow things to fester, because world wars have grown out of basic misunderstandings. A basic misunderstanding can lead to your being huffy with somebody for an afternoon or a day or a week. And it can also lead to divorce. And in the larger case of nations, it can lead to war. Quite honestly, these are things that can all be nipped in the bud, but it takes our understanding and awareness and our own personal growth work that we do on ourselves, like the type that I'm talking about right here on the show today. That's what it takes in order for us to be able to think more clearly and more proactively and set healthy boundaries. Because we often get the impression, don't we, as human beings, that boundaries are unhealthy. We think of them as fences or as walls that separate. However, it's imperative that you stand up for yourself in relationships. It was quite imperative to me after the cruise in 2013, the ill-fated Alaskan cruise, that I stand up constructively to my mother. And what I did was I had a similar type of conversation to the one I just outlined for you, that I got inspired to have by reading Robert Bly. And this is, okay, here's what's going on. I do not permit people to speak to me this way, and you will not speak to me this way. And here's what I expect in the process. I also went on to share that she might be expecting me to lash out, to become verbally angry, to throw a temper tantrum, things that I would have done at 12, I was not about to do in my early 40s, happily. And, I know there are people that are even older than their 40s that throw temper tantrums. Nobody's perfect, of course, but all of these are tools that you can put to use. So I had that conversation with her, and that led to a bit of a freeze, as you might imagine. And I still wanted to give her the opportunity to have a relationship with my kids, but my boundary was, I'm not going to have anything to do with that. I repeat, I'm not going to have anything to do with that, because I will not allow you to speak to me and yell at me the way you have done throughout this lifetime. It's toxic. And I went on to outline how it made me personally feel. This is a conversation that we had. And yeah, there was very little contact after that. So I needed to do that for my own sanity, and I'll talk in a minute about how that benefited me, because it did. It benefited me tremendously. So, as you'll know, if you listen to the very beginning of this show, my mom passed away in 2016. And I'm talking about this today because this subject is really, really important. It's important for all of us to find ways, constructive, skillful ways that we can relate to toxic people. Because there are ways. That's why people listen to podcasts. That's why people read personal growth books. And I've had these experiences, which is why it's so critically important for me that I take the microphone like I've got right now and teach about this, because I don't know who this is going to help. Right? And maybe it's not going to help you, but it might help somebody that you pass this show link on to. You don't know that, right? So if you are listening today and this is a benefit to you and you would like more information, then please pass this along to people and feel welcome to email me as well, because I'm happy to take questions about the show, about the content of the show. The email address is tomas@tomasgarza.com, and that is spelled, incidentally, Tomas. That's the Spanish variety of Tomas without the H. So tomas@tomasgarza.com. Feel welcome to write me with your questions. I would love to hear from you. And the reality is we all need to set healthy boundaries in our lives. And I haven't even touched today on the topic of forgiveness and release, which is incidentally going to be the subject of next week's show. There's a lot of spiritual literature about that. There is a lot of information on the topic, and there's also a lot of misunderstanding about how that actually works. And that's going to be the topic of the show next week, is forgiveness and release. So, I do want to give you that preview. You can stay tuned for that. But for today, the question is, how are you going to create healthy boundaries in your life? Because if you're in the situation where you need to create them, how are you going to stand up for yourself? And I will tell you from personal experience, it's not easy to do. In fact, it was excruciating for me to stand up to my own mother. And I knew that she was going to make every effort that she could make to make me feel guilty and feel small and little and like a horrible person for insisting that she treat me as an adult. And well, I was right, but it didn't make it easy for me to have the conversation. Yeah, as you know, it took me years to get to the point where I could, and you may not have years in your situation. What if you don't? What if this is a conversation that you need to have right away? Now, these are resources that are available to help you. There are many conflict resolution organizations and techniques, and the internet is a great resource. But I always want to inspire people and invite people to follow their own heart. Follow your own heart. If you have to have this conversation, a good question for you is, what's it going to cost me to stay the same? And what's it going to look like if I change? For me, it presented a feeling of tremendous, tremendous psychological reliefs. I felt more mature. I felt more confident, authoritative, more powerful. It in the end, despite being a very hard conversation to have, felt good for me to say, I'm not going to be treated this way. Yeah, have you left a toxic relationship? Is that what you said? I'm not going to be treated this way. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But if you're in this situation, we can always learn from other people's mistakes, and I allowed all of this for so long because I wanted to preserve a relationship. And it may be that you feel so guilty about possibly ending the relationship that you're hesitant. So again, ask, what's it going to cost to remain the same versus what's it going to cost to deliberately create change in your life? Personally, I'm very, very happy and thrilled that I stood up for myself. And if this is something that you feel you need to do and that you would like to do, then I want to invite you to do that too. And there's help out there for you. You can write in with questions to me. You can reach out to a friend. You can reach out to any number of people, qualified professionals, if you need a qualified professional. And, if you're in a legitimately toxic, abusive relationship, I do want to implore you to please get help, because there are ways that we can handle all of this. And what happens is we can come out on the other end, our own person, acting as our higher self. And that's my wish for every single one of you. So thank you for joining me this week on Decide to Transform. Catch me next week on Om Times Radio, where we'll talk about forgiveness and release. And have a great week, everybody.